Many of us have been taught about avoiding stress. What if this attempt to escape stress is not the solution? Paul Taylor is going to share with us how to embrace discomfort. That doesn't sound good to me. To not only survive but thrive in the modern world. I hate this hormesis thing. Go to pain to get benefit. It makes sense, but I wish it didn't. Paul's a former British Royal Navy aircrew officer, former adjunct professor of the University of San Francisco, a neuroscientist, exercise physiologist, nutritionist, currently completing a PhD in applied psychology, where he's developing and testing resilience strategies with the Australian Defence Science Technology Group and the University of Newcastle. He was voted Australia's Fitness Industry Presenter of the Year twice, and in 2022 published a book, Death by Comfort. Oh God, I hate that. Which won the Australian Business Book Award. There's so many masochists out there, and it turns out they're right, which is bloody annoying. Ladies and gentlemen, open your minds, fasten your seatbelts, don't get too comfortable, obviously. Insert your pins at the origin of the talk, and please join me in welcoming Paul Taylor.
Thanks, Mark. I'm going to talk about the impact of exercise on longevity, and I am here to convince you that nothing that has been talked about at this conference has anywhere near the impact on longevity as exercise does. The stuff that I'm talking about that is within our choice, and hopefully that will become quite clear as we go through. So for me, the problem statement is that we are currently the most overweight, most depressed, most medicated, and most addicted cohort of adults that there's ever been. Not necessarily in this room. I would hope it's not representative of the Australian population, but think about this. The most overweight, depressed, medicated, and addicted cohort of adults there's ever been, and life has never been so good. So clearly, something is wrong with the way that we're living modern life. And for me, a lot of it comes down to this picture. This is what your genome and my genome is wired for, being a hunter-gatherer. And I'm going to give you my favorite quote in any research journal I've ever read. It's from the Journal of Applied Physiology in 2012 by Professor Frank Booth, a legendary exercise physiologist. In this research paper, he was talking about the human genome. Here's what he said. The human genome has not changed in over 45,000 years. The current human genome requires and expects us to be highly physically active for normal functioning. Note the way he didn't say optimal functioning, he said normal functioning, yet we don't move very much at all, which we will unpack. So a lot of it, as I said, is about modern life, and I'm going to show you a little 5-second movie about modern life, and I just want to see if anybody relates to this. Oh, fuck! Who's on a day like that? Like almost every day like that, right? So the number one excuse for not exercising is a lack of time. And it's basically the craziness of our modern life that comes into it. But let's talk about the guidelines. So what's the physical activity guidelines in this country? Anybody know? Shout it out. So it is actually 150 to 300 minutes of moderate physical activity a week, or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous or a combination thereof, spread over at least 5 sessions and incorporating at least 2 strength training sessions. And for kids and teenagers, it's 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity a day. So how do we track? Well, when you look at in terms of age groups, we don't do very well at all. More people do better at meeting the 150 spread over a week. But then those who do it 5 days or more is a little bit less. And then in terms of the strength training guidelines, it's pretty pathetic. And then when you combine them all, you're looking at an average of about 20% of people who meet the physical activity guidelines. You know, teenagers? Guess what percent of teenagers meet the physical activity guidelines? Have a guess. Shout it out. What percent? 10%, 15? 2%, right? So let's unpack this a little bit. When we look at the impact of SES, so socioeconomic status, we see that the most disadvantaged actually more of them do nothing at all. And the impact of sedentary behavior, I'm just going to talk about one thing because I'm talking about exercise, but who's heard of the Dallas bed rest study? When I read this, that just blew my mind. So they took a bunch of people. Now, this was done 50 years ago or so. They took a bunch of young males and they put them in 3 weeks of complete bed rest and looked at their VO2 max, the impact on their VO2 max, their fitness, and their left ventricular stiffness. And it basically, they had a 27%, I think it was, reduction in VO2 max and about 26% increase in left ventricular stiffness, right? Which was an interesting study. Then they trained them for 8 weeks. And not only did they get all that back, but they improved significantly. But the beauty of this is that they traced them up 30 years later and brought them back in, and they had been normal individuals for those 30 years. And then they did their VO2 max again and their stiffness, and it turns out that 3 weeks of bed rest was worse for the heart than 30 years of aging. That after 3 weeks bed rest, their hearts were worse than what the average people and what they were in their 50s. So that just shows you the impact of sedentary behavior. Now, let's talk about our genome. So a lot of people debate about whether those recommendations are optimal. For me, they're minimal. For me, optimal came from this study. A bunch of Harvard researchers went and studied the Hadza, one of the last true hunter-gatherer tribes left on Earth. They live in East Africa and Tanzania. And 90% of all the food that they ate at the time of the study, they got from hunting and gathering. So what they did is they put physical activity trackers on them to measure their steps, but they also put heart rate monitors on them to measure their moderate to vigorous physical activity. And here's what they found. So the black lines are data from 111 different nations, modern societies. And what they found is that Hadza women and girls basically move twice the amount of steps of women and girls in modern society. Hadza men and boys do 3 to 4 times the amount of steps of men and boys in modern society. But the big thing came when they looked at their moderate to vigorous physical activity. Remembering that the vast majority of Australians don't do 150 minutes of moderate, the Hadza do 945 minutes of combined moderate to vigorous physical activity every single week. They move in terms of intensity 7 to 10 times the amount of the average Australian or average American or average Brit. And when you understand the impact of exercise on our biology, which I will now start to go through, it starts to become very clear why we're struggling with such chronic diseases, both physically and mentally. So many of you will have seen this seminal paper, The Hallmarks of Aging. I'm sure lots of you are familiar with it. I'm not sure how many people then saw that paper at the bottom coming out, looking at exercise, attenuating all of the major hallmarks of aging. So I'm going to go through this quite quickly because I still have a lot. So there are the different hallmarks of aging, and basically I've summarized each one. So let's go through it. So in terms of genomic stability or instability, exercise enhances our DNA repair and oxidative damage by enhancing those endogenous antioxidants. Denise talked about that earlier on. Superoxide dismutase catalase, glutathione peroxidase. For me, they are the special forces of your antioxidant defense system, right? Whereas supplemental antioxidants, that's like your dad's army. I can't really avoid the military comparisons, being ex-military, but it's thinking about who'd like guarding your cells. Then in terms of that intracellular environment, we know that exercise reduces inflammatory cytokines and it increases anti-inflammatory cytokines. When it comes to telomere attrition, we know that exercise increases telomerase activity and actually reduces oxidative stress. So it works on both sides of the ledger. And then from epigenetic alterations, it actually influences our epigenetic markers, potentially reversing those age-related changes. When it comes to cellular senescence, it actually reduces the accumulation and their pro-inflammatory secretions. So it actually helps us maintain tissue health. And then it actually supports our stem cell health and proliferation through the activity of myokines, which we will do a deep dive on in a second. And then loss of proteostasis. Exercise actually boosts the function of protein quality control systems, such as heat shock proteins. Where's Christabel? Is she here? I was just thinking when she was doing that presentation this morning, where have you been all my life? That was awesome. That home makes we need to do a double act at some stage. And then dysregulated nutrient sensing, insulin sensitivity gets improved, regulates mTOR. I will have stuff to say about mTOR. Too many people, for me, are trying to suppress mTOR. mTOR inside muscle cells is very different gravy than mTOR outside, right? And I think we're going to see negative effects of people doing too much fasting and calorie restriction, and I'll expand on that later on. And then in terms of your mitochondria, exercise is manna for your mitochondria. It is just the best medicine for your mitochondria. So that's a bit of a summary of that. And then I just put this in. This is out of the paper. And for those who want to get a little bit geekier and do a little bit of dive into it, I'll let you do that on your own. But again, just looking at some of the ways that exercise actually exerts its effects on all those different hallmarks of aging. So let's now talk about, for me, exercise as a magic pill. So this research paper, these are two of the world's greatest exercise physiologists, Peterson and Salting, and they produced this landmark paper showing that exercise prevents and/or treats 26 of the most common chronic diseases that we suffer from. Can you imagine if the pharmaceutical industry produced a pill that could do all of that? Who'd take that shit? Anybody? I'd be all over that like a spider monkey. But exercise has been shown to do that. And we know that it exerts some of its effects because it actually controls our gene expression. So Professor Frank Booth showed more than a decade ago that every time we exercise, there are 3 positive waves of gene expression. And the first is about these stress response genes, heat shock proteins, and other classes of stress response genes. And so I've spoken to thousands of people about exercise over the years. And some people say to me, yes, I'm into it, I love it. Other people say to me, I don't like it because it makes me uncomfortable. And my response to them is, it's supposed to be bloody uncomfortable. That is why exercise is good for you, because it's a stressor and it activates adaptive mechanisms that actually make us function better. Exercise is good for you because it is the best hormetic stressor that we know of, and it's evolutionarily conserved. We see it across species and across timelines. And sorry, let me just go back, because these stress response genes, they get released, these heat shock proteins get released inside your cells, and they run around and they mop up the damage, and then they hang around the cell looking for further damage. But they then also trigger the activation of hundreds of metabolic priority genes that just improve your entire ecosystem, both your body and your brain. And then we've another wave of gene expression, your mitochondrial enzyme genes. And it's now been demonstrated that exercise not only improves mitochondrial health and function, but can actually induce mitochondrial biogenesis, right? And particularly high-intensity interval training, right? Is very, very good at inducing mitochondrial biogenesis. And we know that these heat shock proteins that I talked about, they're released in the brain, in the peripheral, in the immune tissues. They're just released all the way throughout your body and have these positive effects. But if we think of exercise as medicine, we now know the ingredients, and the ingredients are called myokines. And when I did my master's degree in exercise science nearly 30 years ago, we were told that they knew about myokines, and they told us that myokines basically help break down energy, glucose and fat, to provide energy for the cell, and then they help to remodel the muscle, help to make it bigger, faster, stronger. We now know so much more about myokines, and there's multiple myokines. Back when I was doing it, there was a handful of myokines that had been identified. We have now identified more than 600 myokines, and we only know what about 60 of them do. But they have positive effects throughout all of our organs, right? So if we look at this, we know these myokines get released outside of the contracting muscle cells. So it doesn't matter whether you're running, lifting weights, gardening, doing yoga, dancing, anything that you're doing that is creating muscular contraction is producing myokines. And they're produced in proportion to the intensity of that contraction. And we now know they get outside of your muscle into your circulation, have a positive impact on your immune system, positive impact on your entire stress response system. They have a positive impact throughout your gastrointestinal system, even improve the diversity and the function of your gut microbiome. They help your pancreas to secrete insulin, your liver to dispose of glucose, and they help remodel bone and blood vessels throughout your life. And then in the brain, they do extra special work. So a number of different myokines end up in the production of BDNF, which most people will be aware of, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which helps you to grow new brain cells and create connections between brain cells and protect your brain cells against damage. So these myokines, for me, are one of the frontiers of medicine. And part of the issue becomes as we get older. As we get older, we become more and more anabolic resistant, right? And there's a couple of things that happen as we get older. So who here has noticed that they're putting on weight and blamed their metabolism? Anybody? Tell the truth and shame the devil. Or had heard their clients talk about it. Anybody heard that? Right. Yeah, okay. What we know is that as you age from your 20s into your 30s, into your 40s, into your 50s, 60s, 70s, people's metabolism slows. And 100% of the decrease in metabolic rate up until the 60s is explained by loss of muscle. So people get fat not because their metabolism goes, it's because they lose muscle that then drives down their metabolic rate. And as we get older, we become more anabolic resistant, right? And there's lots of debate about protein intakes, and again, that some of the longevity crowd trying to reduce mTOR and keeping protein low. If you keep protein low, it is an absolute disaster. What we now know is that the guidelines around protein, the RDAs, which haven't been looked at for 50 years, were based on very flawed nitrogen balance studies, and recent research suggests that they're less than half what they should be. We're actually now recommending, particularly for people older than 50, 1.6 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, right? Which is a bucket load of protein. And what happens as people age is they eat less protein rather than more protein, which then compounds this anabolic resistance. And when you lose muscle, you lose myokines. It's as simple as that. You lose the ability to produce the world's best medicine. I think that's how I like to simplify it to people. And it's not unusual for somebody to hit the age of 75 or 80 and they have lost 50% of all of their muscle mass. Now, not only does that have an impact on myokines, but it also has an impact on daily function, right? And if somebody at the age of 65 trips and falls and breaks a hip or a pelvis because they don't have muscular power and that ability to recover, because we lose our fast twitch fibers first, they got a 50% chance of being dead within the next 5 years. So falls are the 6th biggest killer of people the age 65, and they're the 5th biggest killer of people the age of 75 and older. And then what happens if people do have a fall, they stay indoors more, and then they completely destroy their brain function. And the whole cycle gets worse and worse and worse. And for me, the trigger is losing muscle, or one of the big triggers is losing muscle. And so let's talk about that whole aging process and anabolic and catabolic hormones. And we know that exercise is basically the best way to counter this. So typically, as we get advancing age, we get reductions in testosterone and DHEA, free testosterone. We also, IGF-1, HIIT, human growth hormone, insulin goes up, steroids, corticosteroids, cortisol goes up. But exercise, if you look up the top, pretty much counters all of those things, right? And It's a combination of cardiovascular training, which has been talked about ad nauseum for years. For me, there's been nowhere near enough emphasis on lifting heavy shit. And every person in this room needs to lift heavy shit. It's as simple as that. I don't know if I can put it any clearer. So let's talk about direct studies on longevity. So all of these observational studies I'm very skeptical of, particularly when I ask people about exercise and what they eat. Why is that flawed? Because people lie, right? They overestimate their exercise and they underestimate their nutrition. And actually, Prentice et al. In 1984 did a study with doubly labeled water that basically showed that normal weight people would underreport their calories by about 50 a day, and obese people would underreport their calories by about 1,000 a day, right? So people lie, right? And they forget, but mostly they lie. This, for me, was a great study because they all had done 12-lead ECG stress testing on their hearts and had VO2 max testing. So it's not about how much exercise you do, it's a hard outcome, right? So your VO2 max, is everybody familiar with that term? Your cardiorespiratory fitness, how much oxygen you can take in and use with your muscles, and it is the gold standard measure of your cardiorespiratory fitness. So all these people were in their 50s and 60s at the time of the study. It was 122,000 of them, just over, and then they followed them for 15 years, right? So a pretty good study, right? And they looked then at, after 15 years, a bunch of them died and a bunch of them didn't. And then they came back and they looked at the hazard ratios on the data 15 years previously. And they wanted to know, did their cardiorespiratory fitness 15 years ago influence the risk of death? And did it ever, right? And what you see is a dose response. You don't see a dose response in medicine. You very rarely see a dose response in supplements, right? But there was basically no upper benefit. So they put them in, this is the lowest 25% of VO2 max, then 25 to 50, 50 to 75. High was the top 25. Elite, they carved out the top 3%, right? So the hazard ratios, basically, people could cut their risk of death in the next 15 years in half by going from the lowest category to below average. Now, if there's anybody in the audience that has found a supplement that can reduce the risk of death in half with a very small dose, I'd be very keen to hear about that supplement, right? Now, here was looking at the hazard ratios, and what I liked about this study is they looked at a number of comorbidities that people had as well. Look at this. Having end-stage renal disease, kidneys are packing up, was about the same death risk as somebody going from above average to low levels of fitness. That's how powerful it is. And if you look at low to below average, right, just below the second green line that I've got, this thing is not very clever at this, but anyway, 95% increased risk of death. This is like having coronary artery disease, diabetes, and hypertension, and a fairy comes along with a magic wand and makes all that shit disappear. That's the impact, and that's just going from low to below average, right? And when they compared low to elite, the people in the lowest 25% had a 404% increased risk of death in the next 15 years versus the elite, right? Now, you could say, well, that study is a little bit flawed because those people had some sort of issue that they went to get checked out. But let's take this study here, which was a massive study on 750,000 people that followed them for many, many years and found pretty much the same thing. That looking at their survival risk, and there is basically the lines, but we see the exact same dose response in terms of survival. Okay, so let's now talk about the next most important thing after your cardiorespiratory fitness is your muscle strength. I don't know if anybody's seen a very recent study come out of the UK Biobank showing that your grip strength in your 50s is highly predictive of whether or not you're going to get dementia. And it's not just that grip is doing something specific, it's a proxy for overall muscle strength. It's one that we often use in the different studies. But what we see is that both muscle mass and muscle strength are highly predictive of longevity. So I'll just show you a little thing on here. And this is looking at people on whether or not they hit the physical activity guidelines and their hazard ratios of all-cause mortality. And you can see that's very significant. And you get the best when you meet both guidelines. That's why they're there. We need to not only do our cardiorespiratory stuff, but we also need to do resistance training to preserve that muscle, and particularly the fast twitch fibers that start to decline first. Now, this is a study, and you got to love academics. They talked about vigorous intermittent lifestyle physical activity, VILPA. I call them movement snacks, but hey, academics, you got to love them, right? But this was just looking at the impact on having these little movement snacks throughout the day, lasting for 1 or 2 minutes, just doing little bursts of vigorous physical activity, running up and down the stairs or doing a 30-second sprint, something like that, and looking at the impact on all-cause mortality down the bottom, right? And so again, very significant. So it's not just about the time in the gym, it's about doing these little bursts throughout the day that actually have a massive, massive impact over time. Now, let's just dive into a little bit into the brain and look at some of the neurobiology. So we know that sarcopenia is very strongly associated with Alzheimer's disease, cognitive impairment, and cognitive decline. And here you can see the impact on both mild and severe sarcopenia and the hazard ratio for Alzheimer's disease. And then looking at the impact, how skeletal muscle mass, having low skeletal muscle mass, is actually contributing to this. So what happens is when we lose muscle mass, if you look on the left, we get much more systemic inflammation because of two things. Number one, myokines are going down, which are very anti-inflammatory, and we're getting the inflammatory cytokines going up, right? And then we have the whole impact on insulin metabolism, which I'm sure people could do an entire talk on that, and the impact on your cognitive function. You'll have heard of Alzheimer's disease being called type 3 diabetes. And then over on the right, looking at the mitochondrial function as well. So there are three very strong pathways that contribute to all forms of dementia that are impacted by muscle. And having low skeletal muscle mass is actually a huge risk for these things, just because of how important muscle is. And we need to really start to think about muscle as a hugely important endocrine organ, and that activates many different pathways. And this actually just looks at the impact on brain health and mental health. And exercise has actually been shown to either prevent or treat all of those mental health and brain health conditions. And this just looks into some of the mechanisms. So there's a couple of different mechanisms. Who was the guy yesterday? Gusto, what was his name? Sorry, right? Gustav. He talked yesterday about kynurenine. So what we know is that muscle contractions actually mop up kynurenine, helping to prevent neurodegeneration. And then if we look over on the left-hand side here, we know that exercise produces cathepsin B, which we think then independently triggers BDNF. And then there's two other mechanisms. So lactate. So you know that heavy feeling that you get in your arms and legs when you're exercising intensely and it feels really uncomfortable and your brain says to you, why are we doing this shit? We can just stop right here, right now. That's when you need to tell your brain to suck it up. We used to think that all lactate did was impair muscle contractions. We know it's not the lactate, it's the hydrogen ion. We know that lactate is actually a fuel source. Your liver uses lactate, your heart uses lactate as an energy source, and your brain uses lactate as an energy source. We know it crosses the blood-brain barrier, and then it triggers the release of BDNF. as does a ricin, which is a myokine produced from both exercise and cold water immersion. We get a ricin release that crosses the blood-brain barrier and triggers the release of BDNF. So there's 3 independent mechanisms by which exercise increases BDNF, and there's a way that it actually reduces neurodegeneration from impacting upon the kynurenine pathway. And this, so let's talk about mood. Mark, what was his name again? Mark Horowitz. I interviewed him on my podcast about this. Did anybody read this paper? This paper completely debunked the serotonin theory of depression. And they believe that it's basically stress that causes a whole heap of depression and mood disorders. And we know that exercise is very good for your mood. Who knew that? Why? What is exercise released in your brain that is good for your mood? Endorphins. Everybody talks about endorphins, but your monoamines do most of the heavy lifting. Dopamine, serotonin, noradrenaline. You also get endorphins. You get endocannabinoids. You get enkephalins. You get all of these. The way I like to describe it is every time you exercise, there is an orchestra going on in your brain. There is a neurosymphony of neurotransmitters that make your brain function better. And most people get that exercise improves your mood. But I want to take you back to the quote from Professor Frank Booth. The current human genome requires and expects us to be highly physically active for normal functioning. Nowhere is that more true than in the brain. Most people get that exercise improves your mood. They don't get that if you're not highly physically active, you deprive your brain of the neurotransmitters that it needs to function normally, right? That's the key thing. And this other thing I want to talk about, this research paper that basically showed, this is basically a 30-minute stress battery, known psychological stressors that reliably release cortisol. In the dark blue, you see fit, active people, and in the light blue, you see unfit, inactive people. What's your takeout from that? You don't need to be a research scientist to decode that. Fit people handle psychological stress better, right? And then it has that knock-on effect. So if you can handle the psychological stress better in your life, then you're not self-medicating, all of those things, you're more likely to exercise more, and it has this snowball effect. So we need to look at exercise not just as a stressor, but as a modifier of stress. I think that is pretty key. Now let's talk a little bit about the gateway behavior. When I saw this research paper, it was released probably a decade ago, I nearly peed myself with excitement because it is the world's greatest neuroscientists and exercise physiologists at the time collaborating. They did a big symposium exploring the impact of exercise on neurobiology. And here is the stuff they came up with, right? So I just want you to follow this from the bottom left. When you exercise, it impacts on all of those brain structures: cognitive, emotional, executive, motivational, and motor controls all become improved. Then it positively impacts your autonomic nervous system and your endocrine system. And at the same time, throughout the central nervous system, you get all of this stuff happening. Repair, plasticity, neurogenesis, all of these different neurotransmitters released, all those different growth factors that improve your learning and memory, directly reduce your risk of Alzheimer's disease, but also improve your behavior on a whole host of things. And we've known for decades that exercise is a gateway behavior, that when people regularly exercise, if they're unhealthy and they regularly exercise for 3 to 6 months, they then start doing other healthy behaviors, right? And so what happens, the psychologist came along and went, we know what's going on. It's self-concept, right? So let's just take somebody who's overweight, right? Hard drinking, hard smoking, has a tattoo, live fast, die young, and their whole self-concept is just, I drink and smoke like a Hell's Angel and all of this, right? Then somebody convinces them to exercise, and they maintain that for 3 to 6 months. What we very often see is they then start doing other healthy behaviors. So the psychologist came along and went, it's self-concept, right? So we had this person, let's just call him Mr. Nurkenfurken, who has this live fast, die young mentality, and that is his self-concept. Then somebody is convincing him to exercise. Now he's got a different self-concept. Oh, I'm the fit Mr. Nurkenfurken. And the psychologist has said he has ambivalence in his self-concept, which he has to resolve. And he does it in one or two ways. Stops exercising and reverts to his old self, which we see happen. Or starts to adopt other healthy behaviors to align with his new self-concept. And they were very happy with themselves, the psychologists. And then a neuroscientist came along and stuck Mr. Nurkenfurken in a MRI, in a scanner pre and post, and found that he actually grows volume in his frontal lobes, preferentially the right frontal lobes, which are the seat of willpower. So when people exercise regularly, they improve their willpower and their self-control. Self-control was shown from both the marshmallow experiments in the 1960s, but then more robustly in the Dunedin study that's ongoing. Self-control is the single biggest predictive factor of success in life. Way more than intelligence, way more than socioeconomic status, it is self-control. And exercise builds the self-control muscle, if you like. And so we see this gateway behavior happening over and over and over again. And we know that when people exercise, they handle stress better. When they don't exercise, they become more stressed, and it then impacts upon their sleep. And when people have bad sleep, their hunger hormone ghrelin goes up, but leptin goes down, which drives voluntary physical activity in the brain. So then they're less likely to exercise, and then they're more likely to self-medicate, and then it goes on and on. So we get either a nasty, vicious cycle dragging people down, or that can be an upward spiral. But for me, exercise is right in the middle of that, whether it goes up or whether it goes down. So let's now talk about some suggestions. Now that I've talked about all the science, this is from that research paper looking at cardiorespiratory fitness and longevity. Everybody I work with, I say try to get in the yellow, right? But if you are, forget about METs, that's us geeky physiologists just talk about METs, that's your VO2 max. If you've got a smartwatch, it will give you a pretty good estimation, probably within about 5% of your true VO2 max. For me, what gets measured gets managed, right? So know your VO2 max. And if you're down here, you will get tremendous health benefits by just getting into the next one. But ultimately, all the execs I work with, I say, try to get into the yellow. If you can get into the green, that's awesome, but it's really, really hard to get into the green. But just at least try to get above average. For me, that's key. Here are my recommendations around strength training. And again, what gets measured gets managed. So know what you are physically capable of right now and be working on it. And particularly things like squats and deadlifts, they're very, very good indicators of overall strength. And for me, everybody in this room should be able to deadlift their body weight 10 times, right? That should be the goal, right? But it's about working up to get there, right? So whatever you're starting on is just getting a little bit better. Now, let me just talk about the rule of three. So given all that I've just said, who reckons they could eke out 3 hours in their day, or 3 hours in their week, to exercise? Right, here's how I recommend you spend it. 1 hour of cardio, 1 hour of resistance training, and 1 hour where you're moving and thinking. Because when you move and think, you get whole brain activation. So running on a treadmill is good. Running outside is better. Running on a trail is even better, right? Riding a bike indoors is good. Riding outside is better. Anybody ever done mountain biking? Downhill, right? When you were mountain biking downhill, were you like daydreaming about shit? I guarantee you weren't, right? So you got to be completely mindful. This is where doing exercise classes where you're having to mimic someone, doing yoga, Pilates, dancing is friggin' brilliant for the brain and the body. So something where you're thinking while you're moving, right? Now, and lots of movement snacks. Getting off your arse lots and moving lots. And so here is and I'm going to pull all this together in a slide. So cardio programming, and some steady state sessions. Somebody talked about it yesterday. Zone 2. Zone 2, basically I can talk, but I can't sing. It's 60 to 70% of your max heart rate. But you need to know your max heart rate if you're going to use heart rate training, right? That's the key thing. But just talk, but can't sing, 30 to 40 minutes plus. And and you can do any type of it. So 1 to 2 sessions a week, particularly if you're coming off a low base, helps your mitochondria. And actually the research shows that if you're going to do strength training, if you do 6 weeks of this first and then do the exact same strength training program, you get bigger improvements in strength and muscle mass because you've prepared your mitochondria to actually do it. And then we need to do some of the hard stuff. This is how you move your VO2 max needle as quickly as possible. It's high intensity intervals. Intervals 3 to 4 or 5 minutes long, you can, 2 to 3 minutes recovery, repeated 3 to 5 times. One of the most evidence-based is the Norwegian 4x4 protocol. Anybody familiar with it? You do 4 minutes of very vigorous physical activity, 85 to 95% of your max heart rate. That's going really, really, really hard. Then you recover for 2 to 3 minutes, and then you do that 4 times, right? Or you can do shorter intervals, 30 to 60 seconds. I like the minute one, minute on, minute off. Do that 6 to 10 times, but you are going all out. This is uncomfortable. This is the stuff that Mark really does not like, right? That's the very uncomfortable stuff. Now, and there's just some of the heart rate zones. And look, so for me, if you want health and longevity benefits as quickly as possible, zone 2 and up into zone 5, right? But if you're an athlete, you will want to be doing 3 and 4 as well, right? So different conversation if you're an athlete or you have a sport in mind. And then for me, resistance training, I don't like individual muscle parts. I like movement patterns: push, bend, rotate, squat, pull, lunge. I'll show you what some of those exercises will be in a minute. And then just think work to rest ratio and time under tension. You don't need to think so much of reps. The eccentric. How often in the gym do you see people doing bicep curls and they do and then they just drop it and then they drop it? They've just wasted the best part of the exercise. We know eccentric contraction, where your muscle is contracting while lengthening, that actually is the best way to improve strength and overall muscle size. And most people waste the eccentric portion, right? If you want specific strength, it's got to be high force. You got to lift heavier and heavier shit if you want to develop strength. Hypertrophy, we used to say it's 8 to 12 reps. Now it's 8 to 20 plus. We're now seeing you can actually do. Hypertrophy is a volume game. Strength is an intensity. It's a load game, right? And then for muscular power, you want reasonably light weights, but moved quickly. So here are some examples just that I have put of different exercises that people will be aware of under those different movement patterns. The 7th recognized movement pattern is gait, but we've covered that with our cardio, if that makes sense to everybody, right? And so for me then, here's just some of my training. So there's always been this distinction between cardio training and resistance training, right? So this is using heart rate monitor. There's a zone 2 session. I had a little interruption, and you can see it's mostly in the blue. Here's the Norwegian 4x4. And you see the first one, it's kind of hard to get right into the red, but then I'm right up into the red as you get into it, and then you recover, right? That's telling me I need to hurry up or I'll piss Mark off like everybody else. But check this one out. This is me doing resistance training, right? This is the one that I talked about, doing those 6 different movement patterns, 30 seconds work, 10 seconds recovery, repeated 4 times. So that's 24 sets in about, 16 and a half minutes. But look at it. And I stupidly, as an old person, didn't do a warm-up. If I'd have done a warm-up, I'd have been right into the amber straight away. And amber and red. That is a VO2 max session, but I'm doing strength training. Does that make sense to everybody? There's a CrossFit session. Now that's an hour, and there's a bit of movement prep and stuff. So there's the real work. So really getting up in there. But this is traditional strength training, doing heavy deadlifts and heavy squats with a bit of a rest. So we don't have to separate out cardiovascular from strength. If you're doing high intensity strength circuit-based training, just go for 30 seconds, rest for 10 or 15, go on to the next one. You will get a cardiovascular workout and a strength workout at the same time, right? Now, here is my recommendations for basic benefits on the left-hand side. And then if you want real health span and lifespan benefits, we have to up it. It's just as simple as that. The 150 minutes a week, I don't think is going to cut it if you want to optimize your health span and your lifespan, and you've got to do some of the hard stuff, and you've got to lift heavy shit as well. It's just as simple as that. And so I know that somebody's going to come along and go, that landmark paper that you talked about with the landmarks of aging has actually been updated, and 3 others have been added onto it very recently. Well, there's the 3 others, and there is exercise's impact on chronic inflammation, exercise's impact on gut health, and then exercise's impact on autophagy as well. So exercise covers all the bases in terms of longevity. And so I think, given all that I've just said, that ACNEM should actually be renamed as ACNEM, the Australian College of Exercise, Nutritional and Environmental Medicine, because I will just leave it at that. Thank you.